Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. Campaigning is at fever pitch in Assam, a state that will be going to poll soon. Key electoral agendas, of course, include CAA issue, something Assam has vehemently stood against. What's happening in terms of their cultural identity, and more importantly, economic pain points, including the situation in terms of unemployment, farm stress, and the tea garden worker situation. Joining me to talk about what the Congress's economic agenda might be, as also what their key poll points will be, is Congress MP Gaurav Gogoi, also the son of former Chief Minister of Assam, the late Mr. Tarun Gogoi. Thank you very much for joining in and speaking with me, Gaurav. I know things are quite hectic in terms of a pace in Assam. I want to start with talking a little bit about the yatras that you all are conducting, Assam Basaon Ahok. Tell me what the thought behind that is and what the mandate is really as you move across the state.
Well, Assam Basaon Ahok literally translates to "Come, let's save Assam." And we have doing these four bus yatras in four different parts of the state. And the top state leaders are participating in these bus yatras. And essentially, a traditional campaign, Mitali, is where you just go and address large meetings and then you go from one big campaign rally to another. These bus yatras are entirely different. We're doing very small town hall meetings, very small pit stops. We're focusing on more one-to-one interactions, and we're meeting a cross section of society. We're just not meeting party supporters or party voters. We're even reaching out to people who traditionally don't vote for the party, but they have genuine concerns. And why we're emphasizing on saving Assam is because really, Assam is a major state in the Northeast, and it's in really an economic doldrum right now. There's a huge problem with unemployment, which was already there in the Northeast, but it has just increased far more given the trends in the last 4 or 5 years with demonetization, GST, as well as the COVID-induced lockdown. And there's a real sense of panic that while unemployment is at record levels, there's a growing price pressure on ordinary households. While incomes are stagnant or incomes are in fact fluctuating with the COVID-induced lockdown, prices and inflation is a huge burden, and many people are being pushed further into debt. So while people enjoyed the fruits of economic growth between 2001 to 2015, right now they're really feeling the pinch. And at this time, the support that the government should be giving in the state is just not coming. On the other hand, they are pursuing divisive policy, which are threatening to undermine the peace that was ushered in Assam by the Congress government in the last decade. And we understand, especially in the Northeast, that peace between our diverse communities is very important as a bedrock for development. And that is being threatened right now, whether it's with Citizenship Amendment Act or with the divisive policies. So what we're seeing right now is an attack on our culture, on our values, on our language, as well as an attack on the poor. And now through this yatra is what we're saying is that we're reaching out to the people, telling them that we stand with them in these troubled times, and together we can save Assam for a better future for our children.
Sure. I do want to talk about economics at length, Gaurav, but I want to pick up some of the issues that you alluded to. Of course, CA will be amongst them. Before that, though, that seems to be the process in which you are building your manifesto as well. It seems to be a more collaborative process rather than the Congress setting out its manifesto. Same thought process behind that. You're trying to get in more feedback from citizens?
Yes, absolutely. I think, it's very important that, a manifesto exercise should not be conducted in a hotel room in Delhi, or should not be outsourced to certain individuals within the party. It should be, something that the top leadership of the state should be involved in, and that's what we're doing. And it's been a very fascinating exercise. The wealth of information that has been coming in from small traders, from small businessmen, from small self-help groups. From the various sectors of the informal sector, where a majority of people in Assam are unemployed, has been tremendously beneficial. And at the same time, this yatra, through this yatra and while soliciting suggestions from the people, people are also being reminded of the work that was being done in the government of my late father, Shri Tarun Gogoi, and they are able to see a clear contrast as to what was being done then and how their society or their community benefited, and they can see a clear contrast now as to how they feel much more ignored and neglected. So really you feel the pain and the anxiety that exists in the people of Assam. And people can see that here are the Congress people trying to identify that pain. And on the other hand, the state government is doing these doing these huge rallies where they seem to be exuberant and overjoyed, which really does not reflect the ground reality. The exuberance of the BJP campaign rallies just does not reflect the anxiety of the people on the ground, not the common person.
Let's talk about CAA then, Gaurav, because that's the one on which the Congress has chosen to take a very hard stand. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi was in the state a couple of days back. He was speaking in Sivasagar and he made the point very pointedly that CAA will not be implemented if the Congress does indeed come to power. Is that something that you are going to hold as the core plank of your outreach?
Absolutely, Mitali. I mean, for those who know the history of Assam, understand that the entire agitation that took place in the 70s and 80s, which finally culminated in the Assam Accord, which of 1985, which kind of had a clear consensus as to what we define as an illegal immigrant or an undocumented immigrant. And that has been completely violated by the Citizenship Amendment Act. And again, rolling back, the harmony that existed between the Assamese, the Bengalis, the tribals, the non-tribals, and you can see the contrast in approach. That while the Assam agitation took place in the 70s and 80s, and people were out on the streets, the then Congress government, at the level of the Prime Minister, had a talk with these protesters, had a talk with the students who were leading the movement, and then in a collaborative manner ushered in the Assam Accord of 1985, and then even gave the students to participate in the political process by instructing the state government, the state Congress government at that time, to step down from power. Now contrast that approach with today's approach, where again there are lakhs of people on the streets, especially in Assam, because in Assam it's not just about the Citizenship Amendment Act. In Assam we have another layer of anxiety because we see this act being linked to the Assam Accord and that being violated. And here, instead of taking the protesters and agitators on board, being trying to engage in a constructive dialogue with them, the government is employing such an authoritarian approach and cracking down, willing to accept or even listen to the genuine demands of the people of Assam. So the people of Assam, through the CAA, are seeing an increasingly authoritarian government in Delhi, which does not seem to understand the culture and the linguistic aspirations of the Northeast, especially Assam.
The counter argument from the ruling party in the state, though, Gaurav, has been that the Congress party never really implemented the Assam Accord as it should have been. What guarantees can you put out at this point that that will, in principle, be the guiding light? The Assam Accord will be the guiding light for governance in the state.
That's an absolutely false charge of the BJP government. In fact, look at what they did. What they did in terms of implementing the Assam Accord. They set up a committee to come up with reforms and recommendations for a proper implementation. This committee was set up at the state level. It had very high ranking members of the judiciary and civil society. The committee framed, not even being sent to the center. Now, of high-ranking ministers in the state government are saying that we don't want to accept the report. So you can see the double standards of the BJP. While they're attacking us and trying to frame themselves in a better light and trying to take a higher moral ground by constituting a committee, in the end, is not even accepting the report of its own committee. Forget about implementing, it's not even accepting it, not even evaluating it, not charged. There's a double standards. When it comes to the Congress government, as per the Assam Accord, during the previous Congress government, we brought in the NRC, the National Register of Citizens, which was supposed to give a very strict verification process as to who are the people in Assam who have illegally entered in Assam post the cutoff date as set in the Assam Accord. And what happened to the NRC? Again, a process that was started by the Congress government with the right intention, respecting the will of the Assamese people as per the Assam Accord, then got completely botched up during the BJP rule, who under their tenure, when they published the results, saw so many genuine Indian citizens being disenfranchised and being excluded. And therefore, we have to understand, the BJP, what they are a party of rhetoric, and the Congress is a party of governance. And we govern, and we try to bring in reforms. We try to bring in people together. And in contrast, they are a party of rhetoric and spin and divisiveness. And people have a clear choice to make in the upcoming assembly elections.
So to be clear then, Gaurav, when you talk about the CAA, is it the CAA that will be on hold, or will you be looking at all three of those, prickly points, which is the CAA, the NRC, and even the National Population Register that, awaits updation?
We'll be looking definitely at the CAA and the NRC. With the CAA, as a state government, we will explore all means possible under the constitution that prevents the CAA from being implemented in Assam. At the same time, Mitali, let me also tell you, as your publication has done, there are genuine concerns amongst various communities in Assam, especially the Bengali communities, who have come into Assam, but prior to the cutoff date in Assam Accord, but are still, for some reason, are not being considered as citizens as they should be, as per the principles of Assam Accord. And there are certain sections who are, whose rights have not been accepted. We will reach out to them as well and provide a constitutional framework, a judicial framework to meet those concerns. And as for the NRC, there's so many people who are excluded from the NRC. There are people from the Bengali community, there are people from the Gorkha community. And, there's so many families who are very well recognized. They're not just the poor and the illiterate, they're very well recognized, established families who received awards from both at the state and the central level who are excluded. And therefore, we will definitely look at a process for ensuring that the NRC really represents the true, Indian citizens there living in Assam as of now.
When the CAA protests broke out, Gaurav, it was identified in large part with Upper Assam. That's where the protests were really sort of widespread and really very vocal. When you're traveling through other parts of the state, is this something you're seeing echoed in Lower and Central Assam? Is this something, for example, you're seeing in rural Assam as well, where the concerns are that an organization like the RSS has actually made inroads into rural Assam to a great degree? Are you seeing any variation, or do you see this as a largely unifying feature or unifying cause? People are not in support of the Citizenship Amendment Act?
Well, broadly, people are not in support of the Citizenship Amendment Act. But as you said, there are various interpretations of the protest. Some are seeing it as a violation of the Assam Accord. Some are seeing it as just a plain rhetoric to win some votes, but it has absolutely, because it is unconstitutional, there's no proper means of implementing any of those suggestions in the citizenship which gives any form of protection. So a certain section feels that it is just a cosmetic sop being offered by the BJP government. And the third, people are also seeing it as a crackdown on democracy, the way protesters and agitators were handled with, especially the young people, the way, they were so brutally treated. We've lost 5 young lives. There are 5 martyrs of the CAA agitation: Sam Stafford, Dipanjal Das, Ishwar Nayak, Panging, and Alim. It's 5 young boys who lost their lives. So, and because of the police brutality, and nobody from the police have been booked, or even no strict action has been taken. So, as I said, there are 3 layers to the of the Assam Accord and the threat to our Assamese culture and language. The second is a cosmetic sop to win some votes, which has absolutely no constitutional ground and has no actual way of delivering any benefit or any protection. And third is a sign of increasing authoritarianism at the central level in Delhi, and with the voices of young people increasingly being suppressed, and very disturbing remarks coming from the Central Home Minister, who has made very public remarks against agitations and andolans. And you've seen the Prime Minister also make very strong remarks of those who participate in Andolan. All the major reforms in the world and India come from Andolans. The freedom struggle was an Andolan. Chipko Andolan was an Andolan. The movement for women rights, the movement for the SC and ST rights, the only authoritarian and fascist trend of this government, which the people of Assam and especially the young are resisting.
Mm. The perception seems to be that around this election, Gaurav, a large issue for locals is this sense of identity. That's really sort of coming to the fore. In that context, how important a role do you see some of the regional parties playing? I know that the Congress has announced a grand alliance. Tell me a little bit more about what shape and form you see this alliance taking. How are things progressing, for example, with partners like AIUDF? And would you look to partner with the Assam Jatiya Parishad if that option is opened up at any point?
So, first of all, this election will be a political battle between two alliances. Our alliance versus the BJP's alliance as well. And the BJP allies are the regional ally, the Assam Gana Parishad, which ruled in Assam prior to 2001, and an ally of a particular tribe called the Boros. And so they are the three-party ally at the state level as well. And that alliance would be, pitched against our alliance, in which we have the left front, we have some small independent parties, and we have the AIUDF, which is a more established party as well. So, and I feel that the CAA would be is how people would view these two alliances. There's one alliance which is in ruling, which supports the CAA, and there's another alliance which is in the opposition, which opposes the CAA, and that's how people would see it. And we see, while our alliance is has been recently created, so there's a lot of talks that are going on in terms of how we should involve some other parties who are on the outside, and how we should frame our frame our campaign strategy. So the talks are going on, and the talks are being done in an extremely productive and a very conducive atmosphere. With respect to the two new regional parties that you pointed to, I think as long as the common mandate is that we are opposed to CAA, and we feel that for the betterment of Assam, the BJP government should not be in power. I think we are trying to reach a broad consensus on that front, and it's up to them. While the doors of our alliance, the Mahajot, is open to them, it is for them to see how they want to achieve that objective. Do they feel that by being outside the alliance, they have collectively we have a better chance of putting our government in power, or do they feel being part of the alliance would be better? Me personally, I hope they do join in, but at the same time, it is for the political leadership of that two parties to make. And at the same time, there's a lot of fractures in the ruling alliance as well. Obviously there are two camps in the BJP. We have the chief minister's camp, and we have the finance minister's camp, and those two camps are, we can see very evidently, people of Assam realize that there are two centers of power in the state government of Assam. And at the same time, we're seeing that the regional party, which is the AGP, increasingly their space is being consumed by the BJP, like what the BJP tried to do in Maharashtra and Punjab. They're literally just killing the political space of their own allies, especially in Assam with the CAA and its impact on the AGP.
Let's talk about the economics for a little bit, Gaurav. You were alluding to unemployment, and the CMI numbers at least seem to bear that through, where figures have gone from around 7.5% to over 9% as it stands now. I know the Congress has indicated a one family, one job scheme. First of all, how widespread is the unemployment issue? Where is it that there is the most pain? And how do you plan to implement the one family, one job idea?
Well, the unemployment is at a record level. There was a time back in the Congress government of my late father that overall our state GDP was higher than the national average, and we were performing much better compared to the other northeastern states as well. And now it's a completely opposite picture. We are performing much below the national average, and our employment numbers at a record level. And we have to understand the context in which Assam is. It's a largely agrarian based economic model. With the paucity of land, there's not been much industrialization, ever since the last 3-4 decades. Tea and cement being the only industry that is. And therefore, our model right now is to focus on a more green economy framework, because that's the resource that we have which is our ecology, our land, and everything has to be so that we can preserve the value of our land, the productiveness of our land, and add as many value addition products and supply chains to the products that we already are producing. So we're going to come up with a very green economic model, which is based on agriculture and allied activities and things that we could do around our ecology, with whether it's with tourism or wildlife and other products. At the same time, we have a boundary with our neighboring countries, and that's something which has been completely underutilized. We have a boundary with Myanmar, we have a boundary with Bangladesh, and there's so much back and forth trade that can happen, all of which would need greater investment in infrastructure, in warehousing, in railways and roads. And I think that our state government would, focus a lot more on coordinating those projects with the central government. And third is that we're seeing an increasing influx of Chinese goods in our market, which is really breaking the backs of traditional weavers and traditional livelihoods. So we will have to look at ways to make our traditional artisans more competitive with their Chinese competitors, so that the number of jobs that are created in the livelihoods sector and the traditional artisans sector is protected, and come up with ways to protect. The cost of business right now for especially small business is quite high, with electricity bills and the investment that takes in to just set up a small factory and the time it takes. So we have to protect them as well. So largely, these are the multiple steps and pillars which are involved in order to create an economic atmosphere where every family has one job.
You are also considering farm loan waivers, I understand, similar to the practices that have happened in other Congress ruled states, as also a microfinance plan for women.
But let me elaborate more on the microfinance plan, because that is something that's a real pain point. The self-help groups revolution took us, and while they had a very active period where they created a lot of goods and that generated a lot of income for the families, right now those same microfinance groups are being burdened by loans, and they are increasingly women of these self-help groups are being forced to sell their household goods. They are being hounded by representatives of the microfinance banks, and it is literally, instead of these self-help groups, instead of elevating these women from poverty, in fact, these loans are pushing them back further into debt. So we have to kind of come up with a way of waiving off that debt so they can be productive again. And it's better to do it earlier rather than later, when the liabilities are much less. So we're trying to focus on that as soon as possible.
There's one core area that has seen visible pain, Gaurav, which is the tea workers. I know both the Congress and the BJP have indicated that prices or per day wages will be increased for them, for the Congress to 365 per day. There were some payouts that were made, 3,000 rupees. There's a grant that was announced in the central budget as well. What's going on over there? Because that really seems to be a point of economic strife and pain. And will this per day wage increase address the problem, effectively for the tea workers?
Mitali, there are two aspects to this question. One is from the tea industry, and one is, what is a meaningful wage for the tea plantation worker, which is the core of the tea industry. So let me address the tea plantation worker first. And they deserve a much higher wage for the backbreaking work. Women who are involved, who are looking after their families and are spending entire days working under the sun. They deserve a meaningful wage. And there was a promise that was made to them by the BJP government in the last election that their daily wages would be increased to rupees 351 per day if they voted for BJP. And so they did. And what did the BJP do for the last 5 years? Nothing. And now, as the elections are near, they've announced a minor increase, but it's nowhere close to 351 rupees. And instead, what they try to do is that before every election, whether it's the assembly election or the panchayat election or the Lok Sabha election, they'll give a small financial grant to that family, a one-time grant only, which does not, you know, does not have a long-term vision of creating higher income levels for that household, for that family. Payment that the state government does. And it's deeply disturbing that the finance minister herself comes and does these kind of disbursements before election, whereas she should have a broader economic framework. And being a former minister of commerce, having known the tea industry herself very well, she herself should be the first person to push the state government to fulfill their promise of providing rupees 351 rupees per day. But that's not happened. So therefore, Congress has said that, listen, you should have got 351 rupees in the last 5 years itself. Now we are looking at the next 5 years. You would obviously had the BJP government given the 351 rupees after 5 years, keeping in mind inflation, their daily wage should be increased. And that's what Rahul Gandhi ji promised in his last Shiv Sagar rally, that for the next 5 years, when the Congress government comes to power, we would look at providing a daily wage of rupees 365 uh, per day. And I think that's doable, but we have to take the industry along as well. And the tea industry is a crucial industry of Assam. Assam is known for Assam tea. Assam tea is a globally recognized brand, and the demand for tea amongst young people, both within India and in Europe and the Middle East, is increasingly growing. There's a huge demand for Assam tea in the Middle East, which prefers a stronger flavor of tea, as well as Germany and the UK. So the state government has to work much better with the central government and the tea board and the Ministry of Commerce in order to ensure that the tea industry in Assam is sustainable and viable for the next 50 years. Otherwise, if we continue down this business as usual route, at some point the tea industry of Assam will face the same future as the mills in Mumbai. And it just cannot be ignored. And it just does not make any sense that while there's a growing demand for a product, the state which delivers that product and the industry that delivers that product should be in such financial difficult positions. So we have to come up with a way which takes in account both the life of the industry as well as the life of the ordinary woman who's working every day in those tea gardens.
One final question, then, Gaurav. I cannot let you go without a statutory question about the chief ministership. As you know, there's a lot of conjecture about that. Is there sort of any internal confluence on who the possible candidates might be?
Well, Mitali, to that traditional question, I'll give you the traditional answer, which is, we're a national party and our leadership decides, who's going to be the chief minister of the future Congress-led Mahajot government. But rest assured, I must say, one thing that stands out from the BJP with respect to the Congress is that there is a talented pool of leaders in the Congress party, cutting across generations and ages and professional backgrounds. And we see, and that's why we've been able to do these 4 bus yatras in 4 different parts of the state, because we have that talented pool of leaders in the Congress party in the state to kind of anchor these yatras in 4 different parts and lead it, and who leaders who have public acceptability as well. We just don't seem to have that, or don't seem to see that in the BJP, which is largely a 2-person show, and we can see a lot of misunderstanding, or there's a lack of rhythm between those two as well. So that's why Rahul ji said that, there is hum do, hamare do, and yahan pe bhi inke do. So we can just see that, how the leadership is just, there's just not enough leadership in the BJP, and they're literally busy in infighting. Well, there's a lot more coordination and a sense of urgency and a sense of balance and unity in the Congress party.
We will certainly track events in Assam and, of course, in your neighboring state as well. Thank you very much, Gaurav, for joining in and being so open and candid with my questions. Thank you.